Hello everyone! We continue with the 6th part of The Shepherd Wizard, this time covering chapters 61 through 70. If you have not watched the previous part, or have forgotten some of Turan's journey up to this point, it is better to watch it first so the developments here are easier to follow. Previously, Turan met Solif in the South Sea. What began as a clash between two powerful wizards became far more serious when Solif admitted that almost his entire life might have been deliberately shaped by House Varaha. Now he finally explains just how deep that manipulation really went. Solif started with the oldest wound in his life. As a teenager, he ran away from home with a friend who had grown up like a brother. They wanted to hunt a magical beast and gain experience on their own, but the creature was too strong. His friend died, saving him, and from that day, Solif buried his adventurous side. The problem was that 10 years earlier, Solif saw a distant relative with the exact same scar as that friend. He dug up the grave that supposedly held the body and found it empty. Family records also showed that the relative had vanished on a secret mission during the exact years of Solif's childhood.
Even the magical beast that attacked us turned out to have been raised by my own family. The timing of its release matched that incident exactly.
After that, everything else began to unravel. The cousin who had always been stronger and pushed him to train desperately, the maid he once loved and who later left him, even friends who supposedly shared his passion for history. All of them had pieces of their lives that did not match the records from before they met Solif.
You understand now, right? My family was shaping me. That's why I ran away. Out here, whatever I encounter and choose is at least something they didn't arrange for me.
Turan immediately remembered the records of the Preah God tribe. If they had survived by transferring souls into new bodies, the body of a great house heir would be an ideal vessel. Even shaping that vessel's personality from childhood made magical sense. A new soul would be much easier to hide if the body's habits and interests had already been made compatible. From there, his thoughts shifted to Mesa. She too had been born with extraordinary talent and held an extremely valuable position in Arabian. Turan had no proof, but for the first time, Mesa's hatred of her family and her strange refusal to eat felt like they might have deeper roots.
Don't go back to your family. If you can, get as far away from their reach as possible. Go west.
By morning, Solif headed south. Turan could not explain his full theory without exposing too many secrets, so he could only hope the man would not be captured before getting farther away from House Varaha. Turan's plan changed with it. He wanted to secure a large amount of Spirit of Fire as quickly as possible, then head toward Arabian. If the investigation went wrong, he would at least have a weapon capable of opening an escape route. He also began wanting a disguise artifact. With the mimic relic, Turan could already imitate multiple bloodlines. If he could change his face as well, he could move under identities that were far harder to trace. After several hours of flying with Bijay and a few stops to ask for directions, Turan reached Parayan Island. From the air, the island was large enough to have its own village. Near the center, Turan caught the sharp smell of saltpeter coming from a massive cliff. At the base of the cliff stood a cave reinforced with wooden beams. The steady sound of pickaxes striking stone echoed from within. Turan entered without seeing any guards, assuming he had finally found the mine he was looking for. Only a short way inside, Turan knew something was wrong. The miners were gaunt, bruised, filthy, and every one of them wore shackles around their ankles. When they saw a stranger, they bowed in fear and called him a supervisor. When they learned Turan had come alone looking for saltpeter, their attitude changed immediately. Some begged him to run and take them along. The answer became obvious. All 35 people in the mine had been kidnapped. An overseer appeared carrying a whip. The moment Turan pressed him with magic power, the man's courage vanished. He admitted that Parayan did not belong to a noble house, but to the Corvinus Pirates. a group controlling several islands with knights and worships of its own. The mine produced more than saltpeter. There was gold, silver, and other valuable ore, with saltpeter only a byproduct. But to Turan, the issue was not what they were mining. The issue was the people being forced to mine it.
I don't like this.
Turan opened every shackle with a simple spell. Some miners cried, some immediately begged to be taken home, and one even clung to his leg. Turan calmed them, then pointed toward the overseer, who had tried to flee.
I'm going to deal with the village. As for that one, I'll leave him to you.
Turan took away the overseer's whip, dropped him with telekinesis, and walked out. Not long after he left the mine, the man's scream echoed from behind. The walk from the mine to the village would normally take about an hour. With Bia, Turan arrived almost instantly. The Golden Eagle's shadow crossed the rooftops, and the pirates panicked because they did not recognize the man approaching from the sky.
This is my first time using it in a real fight. Beach, don't be startled.
Turan scattered a handful of black powder over the village, spread it with wind, then sparked it. A massive explosion swept across dozens of meters, collapsing buildings and pulverizing pirates until almost nothing remained. What unsettled him most was the cost. Magic of that scale normally had to choose between range and destructive force. Spirit of Fire ignored that trade-off for only a few breaths of recoverable magic power and a handful of material. Turan immediately decided the formula could not be allowed to spread to other houses. Around 30 pirates who had been inside buildings were still alive. Turan killed those who resisted and buried a few cowards who surrendered so they could be used for information. The island's 2 defending knights became his next test subjects. Using wind, Turan sent only a small amount of Spirit of Fire toward them and detonated it from a safe distance. One knight died instantly. The other survived briefly with his internal organs destroyed. From the experiment, Turan gained a rough estimate of how much powder was needed to kill a knight-level opponent. While checking the remaining buildings, Turan caught a foul smell coming from a large warehouse. Inside were more than a dozen women in ragged condition, some too weak to stand by themselves. They had been kidnapped as well.
Get yourselves organized and come out. You're free now.
When Turan returned to the mine, the miners were gathered near the overseer's badly mangled body. The moment they saw Turan return safely, their faces brightened. Those looks reminded him of Kalamaf, people waiting for a shepherd to tell them everything would be all right. Turan privately admitted something slightly embarrassing. He was beginning to enjoy protecting people and being respected for it. Naturally, he had no intention of saying that out loud. The miners had already gathered the mined material for him. Turan separated gold and silver with heat and liquid manipulation, then crushed the saltpeter with telekinesis. Ironically, this refining work consumed hundreds of times more magic power than the explosion that had just devastated the village. The problem was that the amount of saltpeter already mined was only about 10 kilograms. Since it was the main component of Spirit of Fire, that was nowhere near enough. Turan picked up a mining tool and went deeper. He had no mining experience, but the strength of a high-ranking wizard made technique almost irrelevant. Each swing split the earth. Ceilings on the verge of collapsing were reinforced with telekinesis and earth manipulation, and B.A. scratched and pecked at the rock beside him. Several hours later, Turan emerged with more saltpeter than his target. In the village, the former captives had not simply sat and waited. The healthy were cooking and caring for the weak, while a woman in her 30s had naturally begun organizing everyone.
Good. Keep organizing the resting places, food, and the sick. If any more pirates appear, call me.
Turan dug up the 3 cowardly pirates he had buried and asked which group in the South Sea was the cleanest. They first thought he meant pirates who bathed most often. After some clarification, one name kept coming up: the Red Whale Pirates. The group still raided merchant ships and collected tolls, so they were certainly not saints. But their captain forbade human trafficking and punished indiscriminate attacks on fishing villages. The Parayan survivors gave roughly the same account. The captives came from scattered places: the Seraph wetlands, small islands, the southern Enril Desert, and fishing villages in the east. If Turan returned them one by one, it could take months. Entrusting them to a group with multiple ships made far more sense.
The Red Whale Pirates will take you home. I'll cover the cost with part of what was mined here.
Originally, Turan had planned to take the saltpeter and leave for the Taken Plains. After seeing what Corvinus had done, he changed his mind. He could not exterminate every pirate in the South Sea, but he was strong enough to remove one large thorn and warn other shepherds who had turned into wolves. Over the next day, Turan produced hundreds of kilograms of Spirit of Fire. He deliberately stopped and rested whenever his magic reserves fell too low. No weapon was useful if Corvinus arrived while its maker was exhausted. Once the preparation was complete, the woman leading the survivors showed him the pirate's treasure store. It was far larger than Turan expected. Stacks of precious metal and plunder that had not yet been shipped to their superiors. The Parayan warehouse held more than 100 crude gold bars, around 400 silver bars, jewelry, gemstones, and a bead-shaped magic artifact that sounded as though liquid sloshed inside. The wealth could even exceed everything Turan had accumulated before. Turan did not try the artifact. He already had several items from the western wasteland that had not been analyzed, and a magic artifact could carry side effects or traps. Once he reached House Berg, Ashiz could examine them. He also asked whether the miners wanted a share of the gold and silver they had extracted. The answer was almost unanimous. They had been rescued, fed, and were even going to have their return trip paid for. None dared demand the treasure. After making sure no one was too sick to sail, Turan stored the treasure in his large-capacity pouch. The survivors loaded the ship with food and water, while the 3 pirates he had spared were bound and locked in a separate room as guides and sources of information. There were no expert sailors among the survivors, so nearly all difficult work fell to Turan. Fortunately, he had learned the basics of sailing aboard the Blue Marlin. Telekinesis replaced dozens of hands, and wind magic filled the sails with far more force than they should normally have carried. With the ship finally moving away from Parayan, their destination was Anak Island, the stronghold of the Red Whale Pirates. The first problem appeared quickly. Not a single person aboard knew Anak Island's exact location. Even the 3 captured pirates knew only the name. Turan solved it in the simplest possible way: find other ships and ask. BA flew high to search for sails on the horizon. Whenever she found a ship, Turan approached from the air while releasing his magical pressure. The guarding knights usually ordered everyone to lower their weapons immediately, because they felt as though they were facing a wizard who could sink the vessel with one attack.
Which way is Anak Island?
After getting an answer, Turan always tossed a silver coin onto the deck as payment and left. For the people aboard, the encounter would probably become one of the strangest stories they repeated for years. He repeated the method for 3 days, until they were sure they were close. Turan stopped the ship briefly to recover his magic power and check the passengers. Aside from seasickness, their condition was far better than it had been on Parayan. 2 red whale ships came out to intercept them. There were no wizards aboard, so Turan simply raised seawater and drenched them until everyone was soaked. After he said he wanted to meet their leader, both ships immediately turned back toward the island. Not long after, one ship returned. At its bow stood a huge red-haired, red-bearded man holding a long harpoon. His magic power was noble class, but still less than half of Turan's. This was Red Whale himself, Tasan. Tazan did not look afraid even after sensing Turan's strength. He instead demanded to know what young man dared enter his territory with that much magic power. Turan answered with a request that sounded almost ridiculous in a pirate stronghold. He demanded to be treated as a noble guest. Tazan clearly did not understand the custom, But after it was explained, he immediately pretended he had known all along. His men even nodded in admiration at their captain's supposed noble dignity. In Tassin's hall, Turan explained what happened on Parayan and asked for one thing: return the captives to their homes. Tassin initially assumed Turan wanted help attacking Corvinus, then became confused that someone strong enough to do that alone had come merely to deal with the rescued prisoners.
Why? What do you gain from it? At the very least, it makes me feel good.
That simple answer made Tassin's face harden. His father had been a fisherman who drowned when Tassin was 8. 2 years later, his mother was kidnapped by pirates. Tassin himself had been born a commoner who happened to awaken noble-level magic power.
I became a pirate because of my low birth. But for that very reason, I've never kidnapped anyone. If you're doing all this simply because you want to, then I'm the one who should be ashamed. From now on, you're my hyung.
Turan had no idea what expression to make when a bearded man far older than him called him hyung. Once explained, it was not a lord and vassal relationship. Tassan was simply placing Turan above himself as a person he respected. Tazan wanted to return every captive for free. Turan refused. If Red Whale suffered a major loss for doing the right thing, the influence of this relatively cleaner group would weaken, and they could later use cost as an excuse if they failed to do the job. In the end, Turan gave them the pirate ship they had used from Parayan as payment. Tassan resisted strongly, but one of his more financially minded officers convinced him. The strange negotiation ended with the giver insisting on giving more, and the receiver trying to take less. Some of the rescued people, especially several women, wanted to follow Turan because they were afraid to begin life again. He refused. Ordinary people would only become a burden during his travels, so Turan gave them money to help them settle somewhere new. Over the next 3 days, Turan did more than gather information about Corvinus from the 3 prisoners and Tazan's men. Using concealment, he also moved through the Red Whale base unseen to make sure the group did not show a different face when guests were absent. The result was reassuring enough. Some subordinates privately wished they could be more brutal, but kidnapping and massacring civilians were genuinely not the group's policy. Turan also learned that Solif had once stayed on Anik for several days, drinking with Tassan while searching for people who were extraordinarily strong swimmers, likely following the Wave Rider bloodline from the drowned god legend.
I'll check whether the people I protected really make it home. If there's any trouble, you'll be dealing with the wizard who came to bring down Corvinus alone. I'll remember that, Hyung.
A few hours after leaving Anik, Turan passed Parayan again and moved into the region called the Three Brothers Islands. Corvinus's 3 major bases formed a triangle on the map, and Corvinus himself frequently moved between them. The first target was Binatu Island. The Mimic Relic detected around 200 pirates, 10 knights, and 1 weak noble. Turan also confirmed there were no civilians in the base. That meant he did not need to hold back. From Bidge's back, Turan scattered Spirit of Fire into the darkness and let the wind spread it across the settlement. Repeated explosions collapsed buildings and killed those trying to escape. Hundreds of enemies were reduced to only a few knights and 1 noble inside the stone fortress. Turan noted something important. Thick stone rooms resisted the explosion much better than ordinary buildings. Spirit of Fire spread over a wide area easily, but it did not automatically destroy sturdy enclosed structures. That meant he still had to enter and finish the survivors himself. The noble inside was Vagos, a water bloodline user and one of Corvinus's trusted subordinates. Before Vagos could make proper use of his trident-like weapon, Turan shattered one of his legs with a slingshot and killed the surrounding knights with small charges he had already calibrated.
Where is Corvinus? Answer, and I'll kill you without making you suffer. I'll never betray Big Brother.
Turan did not force the issue. He broke Vagos's neck and decided that at least the man had loyalty toward his fellow pirates. After collecting what little treasure remained and sinking the ships he could not take, he flew to the second island and repeated the attack. Corvinus was still nowhere to be found. As dawn drew closer, 2 bases had been destroyed. The Spirit of Fire stockpile had begun to shrink, and Turan could only hope his real target was on the final island. The final island was Deben. The moment he approached, Turan stopped treating it as an ordinary pirate base. There was 1 noble as strong as Solif, 3 others with more magic power than Turan, and 7 more who were at least on the level of ordinary family heads. That much power could wipe out more than a dozen decent noble houses. It made no sense for a pirate group to gather such strength without already ruling the entire South Sea. Turan landed quietly and hid Bite inside a small burrow.
I'll come back. But if I don't return until you're truly starving, come out and leave this island immediately. Don't look for me. Be careful.
Using concealment, Turan entered the fortress. None of the pirates had equipment to counter a House Varaha technique, so the approach was relatively easy. Most of the nobles were upstairs, while the strongest magical presence came from underground. In the underground prison, Turan found something he had never expected. Solif was bound in chains inside a cell, badly battered and with his magic power almost completely suppressed. A young noble stood outside mocking him. The chains were clearly not ordinary iron. Magic flowed through them, continuously suppressing Solif, and the longer they remained on him, the stronger the restraint became. An artifact capable of holding a great house heir had to be an extremely high-grade treasure. Turan did not reveal himself immediately. He formed a thin wind path from his mouth to Solif's ear, then another from Solif's mouth back to his own. That let them whisper, without the guard hearing anything.
The nobles here are all elites of House Varaha, right? Yeah. They came seriously prepared to take me back. They brought a pile of suppression artifacts. So, I finally got caught.
Then Solif gave the answer that tied everything together. Corvinus was not merely an ally of House Varaha. The name was a false identity, used by Varaha people with a face-changing artifact. Most likely, the pirate network had been built deliberately as their hidden hand in the South Sea.
I only learned it today. Corvinus is a false identity used by people from my family. It looks like the artifact is the same kind that my childhood friend used.
Turan briefly considered leaving. 2 outer bases were already destroyed, and so far he had killed only local pirates. If he escaped now, the conflict with Varaha might still stop here. Rescuing Solif would mean striking one of the world's strongest houses directly in the face. But the longer he searched for reasons, the clearer it became that he was simply afraid. He had come because Corvinus kidnapped ordinary people and treated them like property. If Turan was willing to punish an evil shepherd while the enemy seemed weak, then cowered the moment that shepherd turned out to be a great house, what would that make him but a coward?
Solif, want me to get you out of here?
Turan had 2 conditions. The first left Solif silent. Apart from the 2 of them, not a single noble on the island could leave alive.
All of them? They're still my family.
Turan then explained the Preah God tribe records and his theory about soul vessels. Solif initially struggled to accept that the manipulation of his life might have been meant to prepare his body for a god, but the way his family had captured and treated him now fit the theory too well to dismiss immediately. Turan also explained the tactical reason. Once Solif was free, House Varaha would know someone had opposed them. If that shadow war was already unavoidable, it was better to reduce as much Varaha elite strength as possible now, before the house could send another force.
Second condition, for roughly 20 years, move with me and give me your full support in whatever I do.
That was practically asking a great house heir to become a temporary subordinate. So Turan offered compensation he knew Solif would have difficulty refusing.
I know where the drowned god's body you've been searching for is.
All right. For now, I'll believe you.
Once the agreement was complete, Turan approached the guard while concealed, covered his mouth, and stabbed his throat and chest until he died. He bent the bars, opened the suppression chains with wind-enhanced lockpicking, and Solif was finally free. Solif's magic power did not return immediately, and his body was still covered in injuries. Turan used the healer bloodline stored in the mimic relic to stabilize him, then lent him the guardian magic artifact. They would have only one chance to make their opening strike matter. Upstairs, the nobles' sleeping quarters were covered by a barrier. Turan did not try to break through it. He sent Solif outside the fortress, then signaled from a window with a small spark.
I'm free.
Light and fire erupted across the garden. Solif's light of judgment whip struck the building, and his shout woke the entire fortress. Pirates panicked, while the Varaha nobles rushed out of their rooms to recapture their prisoner. The moment they woke, the barrier protecting their rooms was lifted. They were moving too quickly to notice that the corridor floor had already been covered in a layer of black powder. Turan remained concealed, dropped from the window, and ignited the spirit of fire filling the corridor. The first explosion of the battle erupted directly inside the elite House Varaha group. Turan had tested Spirit of Fire from many angles on the previous 2 islands. He knew explosions became much more brutal in enclosed spaces because pressure that should disperse instead rebounded inward. In Debin's corridor, he added walls of wind across the windows to intensify the effect. The result exceeded even his expectations. 2 of the 9 nobles died instantly. 2 more were badly injured, their magical presences visibly faltering. Turan had only hoped to moderately injure everyone, and perhaps remove 1 fighter from the battle. The 7 survivors decided to escape through the windows while carrying the 2 bodies. They did not know the powder in the corridor had already been consumed, so staying inside looked like waiting for a second explosion. Turan hovered in the air and chose the smallest man, whose hands were occupied carrying a corpse. A stone from his slingshot punched through the artifact's defense and destroyed the target's head in a single strike. The nobles immediately knew there was a shooter above them, but they could not see Turan. Following the old response to House Varaha tactics, they illuminated the entire area around the fortress until it was as bright as day. Turan had anticipated that. The moment he threw the stone, he slipped back into the ruined corridor and descended through a hole in the floor. Light could not shine through stone and wood, so the nobles still lost track of him. Unable to locate the hidden shooter, the 6 nobles still capable of fighting immediately surrounded Solif. Weapons of light and fire came from every direction. Solif answered with his halo and light of judgment whips, but his condition was far worse than when he had once sparred with Turan. He was injured, his artifacts had been taken, and the fight was 6 against 1. 3 of the nobles at the front even had more magic power than Turan. The only reason Solif did not fall immediately was the guardian magic artifact Turan had lent him. While they focused on Solif, Turan emerged from another side of the fortress and formed a wind path for his slingshot. 1 stone pierced the chest of the noble moving least. The Varaha formation immediately broke down again. The group's leader finally split his force. 2 strong nobles and several others kept pressuring Solif. Ray, one of those stronger than Turan, was sent specifically to hunt the hidden attacker inside the fortress. Ray did not bother searching room by room. He created a giant firebird and sent it tearing through the corridors. Flames swept the building and burned more than 100 pirates who had been hiding inside while watching the wizards fight. Turan soaked his face and burst out through the rear of the fortress. He escaped, but the heat still tore across his back and neck. Without the guardian currently being used by Solif, the burns were serious. Against the burning fortress, Ray approached. He knew Turan was using Zahar-style concealment and sounded confused because he believed matters between House Varaha and House Zahar had already been settled.
You do realize light and fire are natural enemies of Zahar concealment, right? If you're not an heir, what makes you think you can fight me like this? I'm not an heir, but I can still beat you.
Ray fired a massive fireball. Turan stamped the ground and raised a wall of stone. He had just drawn the Earthmover bloodline from the Mimic Relic, a power naturally well-suited to resisting a pyromaniac on land. Turan's slingshot became more dangerous as the stones he launched were reinforced by Earthmover influence. Yet every lethal shot was intercepted by a small green shield that moved automatically around Ray. Turan then slipped a small amount of Spirit of Fire through the air and detonated it near Ray's face. The blast was not enough to seriously injure a high-ranking noble, but it disrupted his sight and hearing for a moment. Stone spikes immediately pierced his feet and lower legs. When Turan tried the same trick again, the black powder exploded the moment it left his hand. Ray had already understood the pattern. As a pyromaniac, he could ignite the powder faster than Turan could deliver it.
I don't know what trick you used before, but the same trick won't work twice.
The duel turned into a pure magical contest. Turan kept raising stone spikes and walls while forcing Ray's green shield to block slingshot shots. The automatic artifact was excellent, but every block consumed its user's magic power. Ray began sweating and breathing heavily. Unfortunately, the Earthmover magic stored in the Mimic Relic was almost exhausted as well. When Turan stepped back, Ray smiled because he thought his opponent had reached his limit. Turan instead pulled out the Mimic Relic and drew on a second source of power. This time Turan raised both hands, one filled with light, the other with fire. He matched their colors until both turned golden, then slowly fused them. An unstable radiant halo formed behind him. The technique was Light of Judgment, a secret of the head of House Varaha and the chosen successor. In prison, Turan had made Solif explain its principle. Normally, it could only be used by someone with the Sun bloodline. The Mimic Relic removed the condition that should have been impossible to bypass.
Light of Judgment?
What are you?
Turan's first whip was still crude. Ray even thought he could have dodged it if his legs had not been injured. Then, Turan created 4 whips at once, and their speed immediately doubled.
I'm not used to it yet, so for now, I can only manage 4.
The green shield still tried to move, but Ray's magic reserves were too thin. Golden whips came from several directions, cutting through his defense and closing every route of escape. The duel ended there. When Turan returned to the garden, Solif was nearly finished. Fortunately, the enemies pressing him were exhausted too, after maintaining the illuminated area and fighting the Guardian. When they saw Turan's halo, several Varaha nobles froze, as though they were looking at something impossible. Solif burned the last of his strength to take down one high-ranking noble. Turan then used Spirit of Fire only once to blind and deafen 3 weaker opponents. 2 were cut down by Light of Judgment, and the last was killed by the slingshot while trying to escape. The last survivor was the Varaha group's leader. He used a cloth artifact that could swallow light, something clearly brought to counter Solif's Sun bloodline. But his magic reserves were nearly empty. Turan eventually severed his arms and legs until he fell.
Concealment, Light of Judgment, flight, explosions. What exactly are you?
Turan did not answer. He took out the suppression chains because he wanted to keep the man alive and extract information about whoever stood behind House Varaha. The moment he saw the chains, the Varaha leader made his final decision. He gathered all his remaining magic power into his own head, then used ignition magic to burn it black before Turan could stop him. Their victory was complete militarily, but terrible for the investigation. The man most likely to know the family's secrets had chosen death rather than becoming a prisoner. The moment Turan looked back at Solif, the victory stopped feeling important. One of Solif's arms was severed below the elbow, his side was torn open, and wounds covered his body. His eyes were already unfocused. If he lost consciousness now, he likely would not wake up again. From the fallen nobles, Turan recovered a glass bottle artifact. Solif had already explained that it could turn magic power into healing liquid. It was far less efficient than a true healer bloodline, but they had no other option. Turan made one dose, then another, and kept repeating the process after resting to recover magic power. Little by little, color returned to Solif's face, and the most dangerous wounds began to close.
I'm alive again.
If you're alive again, make some for me too.
My back got burned saving you.
After they took turns producing the potion until both were stable enough, Solif removed the guardian from his arm and returned it. The artifact had saved his life repeatedly over the course of the night.
It really is one of my treasures. A gift from a friend.
Turan then went to the shore to retrieve BJ. The moment the burrow was opened, the bird asked whether Turan was hurt. Turan said it was over, and that he had even brought BJ something delicious, the magic power of the dead nobles. After BJ returned, Turan gathered the nobles' bodies and their artifacts. The haul was absurd. 23 magic artifacts. 10 were fairly ordinary, 7 were excellent, and 5 were valuable enough to be coveted even by great houses. Turan told Solif to reclaim the items that had originally belonged to him. Hoarding every artifact would not automatically make Turan twice as strong, because each artifact still consumed the user's magic power. Distributing them to capable allies was more useful. From the remaining items, Turan kept Ray's green shield, the cloth that swallowed light, and a translucent mask. Solif recognized the mask as an artifact that could alter a face, likely the item House Varaha used when posing as Corvinus. Then, they began the absorption. 6 nobles around ordinary family head level gave Turan and Solif almost no growth, but BJ changed dramatically. Her magic power, already noble class before, kept surging upward.
I still have trouble believing it.
A sacred relic can absorb magic power and then imitate another person's bloodline.
The final 3 nobles were much stronger. They were only somewhat above Turan, so their magic power was still high quality enough to make him grow. It felt as though his body, mind, and very essence were being pushed to a higher level. When it ended, Turan estimated that his strength had approached Ferga's old level, around 80% of Solif's. In raw magic power alone, he could now be compared with weaker successor candidates of great houses. With his technique and artifacts, his actual combat ability could be even higher. Vijay experienced an even greater leap. The bird cried out in excitement, shot into the fading night sky, and a single beat of her wings suddenly produced a violent vortex of wind. For a long time, Turan had tried to teach Bijay simple spells. The result had always been nothing. Magical beasts normally used only the innate ability they possessed when they first awakened, and no one even knew whether the reason was intelligence, bloodline structure, or something else. Now, through the soul bond, Turan felt something flowing from him into Bijay. It was not magic power or mental stamina, but something closer to information. When the vortex stopped, the flow stopped as well. Turan tested several possibilities. BT still could not ignite fire, use telekinesis, or perform concealment, but she could use the wind magic of the storm bloodline. Her control was rougher than a human's, yet her raw power and efficiency were extraordinary. Turan finally had a theory for why BA had once said only he and Mesa were compatible with her. Perhaps BA had always possessed a special affinity for wind, lightning, or the Arabian bloodline, and the soul bond could only awaken that potential when the right partner appeared.
Never release that bird into the wild. If she ever develops a taste for humans, the great houses will need a hunting party just to catch her.
BJ immediately jumped onto Solif's head and pecked him several times.
I don't eat humans. Turan told me not to.
Even Solif, who had received elite education as Varaha's heir, had never heard of a magical beast awakening a new kind of magic like this later in life. The mystery around BJ had only grown larger. Before leaving, they burned every corpse and the fortress itself. Turan used tracking magic to search for hair, blood, or feathers that might have been left behind. If a House Varaha expert obtained traces like those, they could potentially use them to pursue the group.
So what do we do now, boss?
The title sounded strange, coming from a man much older than Turan, who had been born a great house heir. Turan ignored it and pointed to Solif's missing left arm. Their potions could close wounds, but they could not regrow a limb. Turan decided to go into Arabian territory and use his connection with Houseberg to find a discreet healer. Contacting Rita near the Giraffe wetlands would be riskier, because that area was still too close to Varaha's likely search range. When Solif asked whether Turan was actually an Arabian noble who had stolen Zahar concealment, Turan finally explained his bloodline fusion. 4 powers existed inside his body, but they unlocked one by one as his magic power grew.
3 are open now. The only one I still can't use is lightning. This world is seriously unfair.
To carry 2 people at once, they built a crude swing from rope and wooden boards and hung it from Boldy's legs. It looked completely unsafe, but falling from the sky was not something likely to kill either of these nobles. Bijay took off carrying both men away from the island. From the air, Deben, filled with explosions and corpses only hours earlier, looked peaceful again, as though nothing had happened. Biga was much stronger now. Even carrying Solif and the swing, she flew faster than before. She could also create her own air currents, though she had to hold back so the ropes and boards beneath her would not break under the wind pressure. In the air, Turan kept his promise. He told Solif about the god's corpse in the North Sea, the mimic relic left there, and the possibility that an ancient mirror connected the battle in the South Sea with the place where the god died in the north.
It's strange.
I searched for it for a year, and then you just handed me the answer.
It feels a little empty. Not everything is answered. We still don't know the god's name, why he fought alone, or why there are almost no proper historical records.
They landed for the night, then flew north again while deliberately avoiding the Enril Desert. The conversation on Deben suggested that House Varaha and House Zahar might have some kind of agreement, so Turan did not want to pass directly through territory. Zahar could watch most easily. Midway through the journey, the first swing really did break. Solif fell from the sky and suffered only a minor sprain. After building a stronger version, they finally saw the Taken Plains. This time, not an ocean of golden wheat, but green spring barley. Turan still remembered the route Ashiz had once shown him. After landing and walking for half a day, they reached Zabalin City. A knight named Bin, standing at the gate, recognized him immediately. Once inside, the restaurants, theaters, and streets he had once visited with Ashiz gave Turan an unexpected sense of comfort. He had only been away for a few months, yet returning to Zabalin felt like coming home after a very long journey.
Turan, my friend! Life outside isn't easy, is it?
I knew you'd be back before too long. Yeah, it really wasn't easy.
Ashiz embraced him immediately at the palace entrance. Turan then greeted Medela, the head of Houseberg and Ashiz's mother. He was welcomed as an old benefactor of the family and given a separate annex for himself and his guests. Solif was introduced only as a wandering noble with the pyromaniac bloodline. His clothes were modest, his body showed the marks of travel, and one arm was missing. No one would guess that the rough-looking man was actually the heir of House Varaha. Param was away hunting a giant wolf magical beast, so Turan could not meet his mentor yet. In the annex reception room, Ashiz and Solif sat sizing each other up in slight awkwardness until Ashiz turned his attention to Bijay.
Is this your pet? Her name is BJ. We have a soul bond. And if you want to touch her, ask her directly.
She's as smart as a person.
Bijay politely allowed Ashiz to touch her with a nod. Solif, who had already been pecked repeatedly, could only grumble from the side. The small tension finally broke, and the conversation shifted to what each of them had been doing. Ashiz eventually asked about the Dark Elf subjugation rumors. He had heard about a noble who was extraordinarily skilled with a slingshot and supposedly possessed the Barrier Master bloodline. Turan realized he had accumulated so many false identities during his travels that even he sometimes nearly forgot them. Turan checked the surroundings with the mimic relic, then created a layer of wind that prevented sound from leaving the room. Ashiz immediately realized that wind control this precise was not merely a matter of talent.
Wait, you have the Arabian bloodline?
Turan finally told him everything from the beginning. His mother was the daughter of an Arabian knight who had been kidnapped. His father was a Ahar noble. Their relationship ended tragically, and Turan was born and raised as a shepherd on Hasaril Hill. He also told him about Kiorn, his journey down from the hill, and how he eventually met Ashiz. The last part mattered to Turan. He wanted Ashiz to know that their friendship had not been part of any House Varaha plan. Everything between them had genuinely come from Turan's own journey.
Thank you for being honest. This couldn't have been easy to tell me. I only kept it from you because I was a coward.
Kiorn had lost his family because of Turan's heir relatives. After learning that, Turan carried a vague disgust toward himself. Made worse by the fact that nearly all his friends were Arabian, he had once been convinced that revealing his identity would make everyone pull away. Now, many things had changed. He knew his Arabian blood came from his mother too, that he had been born because his parents loved each other, and his travels had shown him that both Arabian and Zahar were still made of people capable of right and wrong. Most importantly, Turan now had enough confidence to stand as himself.
Keep it secret for now. I don't want to return to either family.
Turan asked Solif's permission before revealing his identity. The moment Ashiz learned the rough-looking man beside him was the heir of House Varaha, he stood and bowed. Solif quickly stopped him, explaining that he had already left the house.
If you trust him that much, go ahead and tell him everything.
Turan continued with the much heavier part. The Preah God tribe records, the soul transfer theory, the manipulation of Solif's life, Varaha's Corvinus network, and the possibility that something similar was happening in Arabian. By the end, Ashiz looked as though he had aged 10 years in one afternoon.
I want to find out whether the Preah God tribe is behind Arabian, and whether they're shaping Mesa's life the way they shaped Solif's. Can you help?
All right, we'll do it. Think of it as one grand performance. And at the very least, I can play a supporting role.
Once the mood lightened a little, Turan moved to Solif's problem. He needed a healer strong enough to regrow the arm of a high-ranking noble, but distant enough from political circles not to spread the patient's identity. Ashiz named Rua Menij, a noble from an Arabian vassal family. Rua had been born from a lower background and adopted after awakening noble-level magic power. She was considered strange because she liked traveling around healing commoners, and precisely because of that, she was not close to many other nobles. Ashiz would contact her. Meanwhile, Turan wrote to Mesa saying that he was staying with Hausberg and wanted to meet. He deliberately wrote nothing about gods, Varaha, or the investigation, because a letter addressed to a great house heir would almost certainly be read by others first. Turan would have preferred Mesa to come to Zabelin. Entering the center of Arabian himself still made him uncomfortable. But if Mesa did not come, sooner or later he would have to see that place with his own eyes. After his first truly comfortable feast in months, Turan carried 15 not yet understood artifacts into Ashiz's room. Ashiz gave a dry laugh at the number. For an ordinary noble house, a collection that large could represent the wealth of the entire family. The ring from the western wasteland only improved night vision, while the earrings slightly increased fire resistance. The Varaha artifacts were much better, mostly focused on defense, support, or imitating bloodline effects. Then Ashiz reached the translucent mask.
If this mask is placed on a corpse's face and given magic power, it stores that face.
When a living person wears it later, the wearer's face changes into the stored face until the mask is removed.
The mask continuously drained magic power while in use. A night might last only a few hours, but a noble's recovery could roughly offset the cost. For Turan, the drawback would barely matter except during a serious fight. When Turan tried it, his face changed into that of a dark-skinned, middle-aged man with a heavy beard. His voice became rough as well, but only his head and face changed. His body tone, scars, and build remained the same. The mask was useful, but not perfect. Then, the mimic relic around Turan's neck began to vibrate. The vibration vanished when he removed the mask. When both items were used and fed magic power together, they immediately resonated violently. The next problem was that the artifacts refused to stop feeding. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 20 minutes. Turan's magic kept being drained. He finally called Solif, and Ashiz joined in as well. All three nobles poured in power until their reserves were nearly empty.
If you're going to do something this insane, at least call me from the beginning.
About an hour after the phenomenon ended, they could finally sit normally again. Ashiz tried to analyze the mask once more and immediately gave up. The artifact he could read earlier had risen into the same unreachable class as the mimic relic. Their appearances had changed as well. The mask now carried wave-like patterns, while the mimic relic displayed the image of a face wearing a bell-decorated hat. Whatever had just happened, the two items were clearly a pair. The moment Turan wore the mask and mimic relic together, a new function became visible. He could see the flow of other people's magic power as bloodline symbols. Ashiz carried the hammer and anvil mark of an enchanter, while Solif displayed the sign of the sun bloodline. The disguise ability had changed completely as well. Turan was no longer limited to Corvinus's face. He could become Ashiz, Solif, even women such as Mesa or Rida. His height could shift by several centimeters. His skeletal structure and fingers could change slightly, and even his skin tone and voice could be adjusted almost at will.
So now you can not only see bloodlines, but also make yourself look like almost anyone?
Turan theorized that the mimic relic might not originally have been such an extraordinary sacred relic. Perhaps Tade and the mask had once been an ordinary paired set. After one half absorbed the magic power of a dead god and a mythical sea serpent, it continued growing for thousands of years, while the mask remained weak until the pair finally reunited.
The most useful part may actually be the ability to see bloodlines. Now we can check whether there really are Zahar people hiding inside Arabian.
Turan tested the function throughout the annex. Berg knights and nobles showed enchanter signs, with some also carrying traces of storm. Even several commoners had faint symbols, much like Turan's mother had carried Arabian blood, despite not being a knight. At the stables, he saw something even more interesting. BJ possessed a translucent Arabian symbol. When asked to create wind, the mark activated and resonated with a faint glow inside Turan. Tilly, Medella's huge horse, had no similar sign.
Turan!
Tilly is so dumb. I've tried so many games, and she doesn't understand.
Turan simply told Bijay not to bully Tilly. After that, he spent about a week training with the mask. Creating a face entirely from nothing felt unnatural, so he mixed features from people he observed into new identities. A broad-faced young farmer, a thin scholar, an old merchant with a hooked nose, and many other variations. Ashiz and Solif tried using the paired relics too, but nothing happened. Even the mimic's basic function did not work for them. For now, the entire ability set was bound specifically to Turan. A week later, Haram returned from his hunt. He immediately became interested in Solif's physique and nearly saw through his cover simply from the way his body had been trained. Solif was forced to claim he had learned from a wandering noble. Turan himself tried to resume training, but Houseberg's old equipment could no longer withstand his physical strength.
You've become very strong.
I got lucky.
3 weeks passed after the letter to Mesa was sent, but there was no reply. Mashiz confirmed that ordinary correspondence between Zebulun and Morgan should take no more than about a week, and noble family letters should be even faster. Turan saw only 3 possibilities. Mesa had read it and deliberately ignored him. She had read it but was unable to answer, or the letter had never reached her. Waiting longer would not reveal which one was true.
I'm going to Morgan City myself.
Ashiz suggested waiting until Solif's arm was fully restored and going together. Turan refused. In an open battle, bringing Solif would be safer. But for slipping inside, checking the situation, and leaving unseen, one person with the new mask was far more effective. For the past few weeks, Turan had been practicing how to become people who had never existed. Now it was finally time to use that ability to enter the heart of Arabian and find out why Mesa had gone silent. So after destroying the Corvinus network, rescuing Solif, awakening Bijay's new ability, and turning the mimic relic into a far more dangerous disguise tool, Turan finally has a way to enter the heart of Arabian without carrying his real identity. The problem is that Mesa has been silent for 3 weeks. This time, Turan decides to find the answer himself in Morgan City. Thank you for following Turan's journey this far. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the continuation of the story. See you in the next part.